I never thought I would come to tell this story. In fact, there are days when I wish I could erase it from my mind, but every time I close my eyes, the images return, as vivid as they were that night. It all started innocently, or at least that's what we believed. My friends and I were teenagers, curious and always looking for something that made us feel like we were doing something forbidden, something that would give us that rush of adrenaline that you seem to seek only at that age. Entering the deep web had almost become a tradition for us. Every time we got together at someone's house, we would lock ourselves in the room and turn off the lights, as if that made the experience even more exciting. We loved exploring the unknown, feeling like we were seeing something no one else could. We never bought anything or interacted with anyone. We were just spectators, or at least that's what we thought. We had seen everything from strange forums to pages offering weird services and things you could only imagine in nightmares. But until that day, we had never seen anything that really made us feel like we had crossed a line from which there was no return. That night, we were at Mike's house. His parents were out of town, so we had the place to ourselves. There were 5 of us, all crammed into his room with the only light coming from the computer screen. It was late, past midnight, and we were already bored with the usual games and jokes. Mike suggested we open Tor and browse the deep web. It wasn't the first time, and to us, it was like a game. We laughed at how absurd everything we saw was, and we felt invincible, as if nothing that happened on those pages could reach us in the real world. After a few minutes of aimless browsing, Mike found a strange link, one we hadn't seen before. The title was in red letters and had no description, just a number, 187. We thought it would be some kind of joke or maybe one of those pages that just shows weird, boring content. Mike clicked it and the screen went black for a few seconds before loading a live video. At first, we didn't understand what we were seeing. The image was blurry, as if the camera had been placed haphazardly. In the center of the screen was a man sitting in a chair, tied up, with his head hanging down. Around him were 5 men dressed in black, wearing masks that covered their faces, masks like those used by construction workers or painters. They were all silent, as if waiting for something. We stayed still, watching, not really sure what to do or think. We were fascinated and horrified at the same time, but curiosity was stronger. As we watched, one of the masked men approached the camera and started talking, but it was hard to understand. There was background noise like interference, making it impossible to hear clearly, but little by little the words became clearer. We realized he was giving instructions for a game that, according to him, was simple. Next to the camera was a box with numbered balls. The screen showed a series of numbers and instructed us to choose one. We looked at each other, still in that state of disbelief that makes things not seem real. It was like we were watching a movie, something fictional. Without thinking too much, one of my friends said the number 5 out loud, laughing as if it were all a joke. On the screen, one of the men drew a ball with the number 5 and showed a paper that said, "Cut his hair." We laughed nervously. It was stupid, like a bad magic trick. One of the masked men approached the tied man, pulled out scissors, and began cutting his hair haphazardly. It looked ridiculous, but the man in the chair didn't move, as if he were drugged or completely resigned. It was uncomfortable to watch, but it still felt like a game without real consequences for us. After that, the screen showed numbers again, and without anyone asking, another one of my friends said 7. This time, the paper said, "Paint his face." The masked men obeyed, pulled out a black marker and started drawing on the man's face, laughing and making exaggerated gestures. It was like we were watching a bizarre show where we had control. But after those first 2 numbers, everything started to change. The atmosphere grew heavier, and although we were still laughing, the nervousness began to show on our faces. We decided to keep playing because, deep down, none of us wanted to be the first to say we should stop. We were young and foolish, thinking this was just a strange video. When Mike picked the next number, it was 3. The paper they drew this time said, "Give him a slap." One of the men approached and slapped the man so hard that even we from the screen felt the impact. The dull sound of the slap echoed, followed by a small groan from the tied man, who barely lifted his head. At that moment, the laughter started to fade in the room. We realized this wasn't just any game. No one said anything, but we all felt it. We were too involved to stop, as if something was pushing us to continue, even though we all knew this was wrong. Somewhere in our minds, each of us must have wondered if we should close the computer and forget about everything, but no one did. We kept choosing numbers. After the slap came the water. They brought out a bucket and threw it over the man, who shuddered at the contact of the cold liquid. All of this felt like a bad TV show, but we still couldn't stop watching. Without realizing it, we had become more than just spectators. We were accomplices. The next number was 8, and this time the paper said something different. Make a cut on his arm. The tension in the room rose instantly. One of the masked men pulled out a knife and without hesitation made a quick cut on the man's arm. The groan that came from his mouth was so real, so human, that for the first time I felt the horror of what we were witnessing. Blood began to flow, and at that moment, the gravity of the situation hit all of us. We were watching someone being tortured live, and we were part of it. One of my friends stood up and said this was madness and that we had to stop, but Mike insisted we had gone too far. Just one more number, he said, as if that could justify what we were doing. No one moved. No one tried to close the page. We were cowards, and curiosity was stronger than our common sense. The next number we chose was 11. This time the paper said, break one of his fingers. I couldn't believe it. My hands started trembling, and I felt a deep nausea as I watched one of the men grab the guy's hand and, without warning, snapped a finger with a sharp crack. The scream was heartbreaking. It was a sound I had never heard before, something between pain and despair. I looked at my friends, and we were all pale. No one was having fun anymore. But for some reason, we continued. We picked another number and then another. Each time, the tasks became more violent, more horrifying. They pulled his nails out with pliers, extracted teeth by force. It was all too real, and although we wanted to stop, we were paralyzed. I don't know if it was fear or disbelief, but no one moved from their seat. We reached the point where we couldn't go on anymore. Every choice brought a new torture, and the man tied up could barely stay conscious. One of the last numbers was 16, and the paper they drew said, cut off his head in one swift stroke. I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a joke, a trick to scare us. But the men didn't hesitate. They pulled out a large, rusty axe and showed it to the man. I don't know if he understood what was about to happen, but his eyes filled with a fear I had never seen in real life. It all happened so quickly. They turned him in the chair, tying his body so he couldn't move. The man tried to resist. His legs moved, and we could hear his gasps, his desperate attempts to free himself, but he had no strength. The masked men held him firmly. One of them raised the axe, and at that moment, for a second, everything froze. I couldn't look away from the screen, even though every part of me wished I could. It was like being trapped in a nightmare you can't wake up from. I felt like time froze right before the blow. The masked man's muscles tensed, and without hesitation he brought the axe down with a brutal, precise movement. The sound was dry, a blow that echoed through the room and that I will never forget. The man's head rolled, falling to the floor with a dull thud. The screams that filled the room didn't come from the video. They came from us. No one was prepared to see something like that. We had gone from being mere spectators to being silent accomplices in an atrocious murder. Mike slammed the computer shut, and we all sat there in silence and shock, unable to process what we had just seen and done. We sat in the dark with the sound of the computer fan being the only noise in the room. No one dared to say a word. It was as if speaking would make it all more real, more tangible. We looked at each other, searching for something, maybe an excuse, a justification for what had happened. But there was nothing to say. We knew we had crossed a line we couldn't come back from. We left the room and each of us went home in silence. There were no goodbyes, no jokes. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the image of the man, his head rolling on the floor. I kept telling myself it was just a bad dream, but I knew it wasn't. I tried to convince myself it wasn't my fault, that we had just chosen numbers without knowing what they meant. But I couldn't help feeling responsible. We had played with a human life as if it were a game, and that thought haunted me relentlessly. A few days went by without us talking about it. No one dared to mention what had happened, and we all tried to carry on with our lives as if nothing had changed. But the fear was always there, lurking. Every time I heard a strange noise in the house or saw someone walking by on the street, I got scared. I started checking the windows before going to bed and constantly looking over my shoulder. I felt like I was being watched. One afternoon, one of our friends called us and said he had to talk to us about something urgent. We met at a cafe and his face was pale, with an expression of panic I had never seen on him before. He told us he had been researching what we saw that night and had found some disturbing information. According to him, the men in the video weren't just torturers. They were part of a network that tracked their victims through the IP addresses of those who participated in these games. He explained that, from what he had read, those who chose the numbers became the next targets. It was like a macabre chain where the viewer went from being a mere witness to being the next victim. My heart stopped for a moment. I didn't know if he was saying this to scare us or if he had really found something, but the very idea that those men knew who we were and where we were terrified me. After that conversation, everything changed for the worse. Fear became a constant in my life. I could no longer feel at ease anywhere. Every time I saw an unfamiliar car parked near my house, I thought they were there to watch me. If someone rang the doorbell without warning, my heart would race, fearing the worst. I stopped using the computer and going out with my friends. I couldn't bear the idea of being around them, of reminding each other of what we had done. My friends changed too. We started drifting apart, not saying it directly, but we knew it was because of what we had experienced. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone was inside my house. I would check every corner, but there was never anyone there. It was a constant, invisible fear that wouldn't leave me alone. Weeks and months passed, and although I tried to move on, something inside me had broken. There were days when everything felt unreal, as if I were living in a never-ending nightmare. My family noticed something was wrong, but I never dared to tell them. How could I explain that out of mere adolescent curiosity we had watched someone die? I knew they would never understand, and deep down I couldn't understand it myself. To this day, we haven't spoken about that video again. I don't know if what our friend told us was true, but none of us wanted to take the risk of finding out. We stopped going on the deep web, stopped getting together to watch those things, and little by little, we stopped seeing each other altogether. I don't know what happened to the other guys. We lost touch, as if distance could erase what we had experienced together. Every time I think about that night, a chill runs down my spine. I'm no longer the same person I was before. I avoid dark places, strange websites on the internet, and I've become paranoid. I've changed my phone number several times and never answer calls from unknown numbers. Sometimes I feel like I see shadows in the corners of my vision, as if someone is watching me. I don't know if someone will actually come for us one day, or if it was all just a way to scare us even more than we already were. But I can't help living with that constant fear. This is the first time I'm talking about what happened, and I do so more as a desperate cry than as an attempt to find peace. I know what we did was unforgivable, and somehow we'll carry that burden for the rest of our lives. I only hope that by telling this story, I can warn others about the dangers of unchecked curiosity and the false sense of security we all tend to have when we browse the virtual world. The deep web is not a place to satisfy whims or a source of entertainment without consequences. It is a dark corner of the internet where the rules of the normal world don't apply, and where what seems like just a screen and a few clicks can turn into an open door to the most real and disturbing horrors you could ever imagine. We thought we were invincible, that nothing we saw could touch us or affect us in any real way. We were convinced we were just observers, spectators of a sinister show that didn't involve us beyond the screen. But the truth is, by entering that world, we ceased to be mere spectators and became part of something much bigger and much more terrifying. We participated, even if we didn't want to admit it, and we let ourselves be carried away by the adrenaline of feeling like we were part of something forbidden. And now that mistake, that unchecked curiosity, has left us scarred for life. What many don't understand is that there are things that shouldn't be seen, secrets that shouldn't be uncovered, and lines that shouldn't be crossed. Sometimes the forbidden has an irresistible allure, but behind that thirst for the unknown hides a price that, in most cases, is much higher than anyone could ever imagine. The deep web is full of places where lives are bought and sold, where human suffering becomes entertainment, and where, at the slightest slip, you can become the protagonist of a horror from which there is no return. It's not just a space where the illegal hides, it's a bottomless pit where morality and humanity dissolve into the purest darkness. It's not a game or a fun adventure. It's a trap disguised as curiosity, dragging you in without you realizing it until it's too late to escape. Sometimes people think they can turn off the computer and forget what they saw, that with a simple click, the nightmare ends. But there are things that stay with you, that haunt you in your dreams, that appear in every shadow or silence, reminding you that you crossed a line you should never have crossed. The price we paid wasn't just constant fear, but the loss of our innocence and the realization that, in that moment, We were accomplices in something horrible. That guilt doesn't fade, doesn't get forgiven, and though we try to move on, the weight of knowing we were part of something we can never forget remains. We weren't the victims, but we weren't innocent either, and that's a burden we'll always carry. So if you're thinking of exploring that dark side of the web, stop and think twice. There's no turning back once you cross that line. Not everything that is hidden deserves to be discovered, and not everything that piques curiosity is worth seeing. There are places better left unvisited, games better left unplayed, and secrets better left buried in the dark. Because the price of unchecked curiosity is not just fear. It's the awareness that you've crossed a threshold you never should have, and that, believe me, is something that never goes away. I can't be too specific here due to the nature of my work, but I'll try to communicate the story as best as I can. I work in the cybercrime division of a law enforcement agency, and that's as specific as I can get. I want to make one thing clear. Most of the stories you read about the dark web are complete fabrications. The tales of red rooms and the stories about hiring hitmen are almost entirely false. Most crimes take place on the regular, everyday web. However, one Tuesday afternoon I got a call saying there was a new case for me. Well, the officer on the other end didn't seem too sure it was a case for me, but they wanted me to take a look anyway. I went down to talk to two young guys, both teenagers, probably still in high school. I wondered what this was all about when one of them started babbling about something they'd gotten on the dark web. Apparently, the two were doing a TikTok or YouTube challenge. I don't remember which, but they were looking for things to buy on the dark web. Again, honestly, there's very little really shady activity on the dark web unless you're looking to buy drugs. So the two were mostly disappointed until they found a site selling books, one of which they purchased. They then handed me the book in question. I put on a pair of gloves and flipped through it. It was full of photos of a young woman. Initially, they were pictures of her smiling in places like a meadow or a city square. But as the book progressed, the photos became more provocative, to put it mildly. She began wearing outfits like a maid's uniform or a Catgirl cosplay, and the final photos were of her without any clothes. "Is this all you wanted to show me?" I asked, wondering what the scandal was. That's when they handed me a card that came with the book. It read, "Thank you for your purchase, dear customer." Inside this book, you'll find a treasure trove of photos of a young woman, though that's not the most special thing about this book. To ensure it's truly unique, we've made sure you can enjoy the full experience. The book is bound in her skin, so feel free to gently caress the leather as you think about her. Again, thank you for your purchase. At this point, I should probably mention, for those who don't know, what anthropodermic bibliopagy is. It's the name for the practice of binding books with human skin. Needless to say, it's illegal. Even assuming the skin came from a corpse, you'd still be facing laws regarding human remains. However, this card, based on what was written, made it sound like the skin had been taken from the girl while she was still alive. Well, either that or she had been killed and then skinned specifically to make this book. I thought the whole thing was an elaborate joke. My first thought was that the two boys were in on it, but they seemed too scared for it to be a prank on their part. I interviewed them separately, and their stories matched. All right, maybe they were telling the truth, but that didn't mean the book was really bound in human skin. Even if it looked like leather, it was probably animal hide, and all this was added for the flavor of the story. I told the officer in charge of the case just that and said there wasn't any real need to investigate further, though I did give the boys a warning about buying things from shady websites. And that's how the case ended. Or at least that's what I thought. It turns out the officer in charge of the case decided, just in case, to have the book examined, and it turned out that the leather binding of the book was, in fact, human skin. As you can imagine, interest in the case skyrocketed after that. Now we were dealing with a possible murder case, and we called the two boys back in. I was also reassigned to the case to try to get to the bottom of it, and I was able to get the URL of the site they used. Unfortunately, all I got when I tried the link was an error message. I did more research but got nowhere. Frustrated, I turned to other sources for help, but there wasn't much progress to be made. Further analysis of the skin revealed it belonged to a woman of Caucasian descent, which matched what I saw in the photos, but there wasn't much more forensics could do, as the leathering process rendered many tests unviable. A DNA test on the skin revealed nothing, and we searched everywhere to see if anyone recognized the girl in the photos. No results to this day. The case was about to go cold when I managed to find an unexpected lead in a forum. I heard about someone else who had bought a similar book and was confused about the veracity of what was claimed about it. They were in another state, but we managed to locate the author of the post, who was a woman who bought it out of sheer morbid curiosity. Forensic tests revealed that the binding was also made of human skin. She had a different URL, one that I tried, and this one worked. The site itself was nothing impressive. It was as basic as possible, like old websites from the early 2000s. I would have thought it was a cheap joke based on just that. But the two cases made me hold back my skepticism. I took screenshots of the website and confirmed with the two boys who first brought us the case that this was the site we were looking for. Both books had been shipped from fake P.O. box addresses in big cities, so there wasn't much to investigate there. Given this, we decided to try the site ourselves, and I placed an order only for nothing to arrive. If anything, what happened next was that the URL stopped working, and this is where things took a sinister turn. One of the boys, the one who had ordered the book, disappeared one day. He was coming home from school and then, well, there were no more traces of him. An exhaustive search for months turned up nothing, until one day the other boy came to us saying that someone had delivered a piece of paper to his house. It wasn't a regular piece of paper, it was parchment. Later tests revealed the skin was human, and DNA tests showed it belonged to the boy who had disappeared. Written on it in what was later confirmed to be blood were the words, "Stay out of our business." I don't like to admit it, but that single incident scared me more than anything I've encountered before. I'm not really used to being in the line of fire. Yes, I know, I'm part of law enforcement, but my work is usually done behind a computer screen. I didn't sleep a wink for 3 nights after we confirmed what it was. I vividly remember how his mother broke down in tears when we gave her the news. There are no more leads beyond that. Anyway, honestly, I don't want anything more to do with this case. The kind of people who would skin someone and then use that skin are not the kind of people I want to be in close contact with. Well, maybe the case is closed, but I'm leaving this here as a general warning. Don't buy things from the dark web, even if it's more than likely a joke, because sometimes they may not be joking. What happened to me probably won't move anyone, I'm sure. I'll admit it right now. I'm a bad guy, a loser who made his money outside the law. I'm here so others can point to me and say, at least I'm not like him. That's been my role in society, and I've come to accept it. But I'm still a human being. I still have feelings and rights, so what happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone. Period. As I said, I'm an outlaw. I sell pharmaceuticals that allow people to forget their problems for a while. The problem is the government has been taking over my work lately, with the legalization of marijuana and all that. Customers are turning to alternatives that are easier to get and don't involve going to jail. It's been a tough season for me financially. I had to diversify my portfolio, so to speak, and turn to arms trafficking on the dark web. Now there's a source of income that won't dry up anytime soon. Unmarked guns and automatic weapons with no waiting period or background checks that appeal to a very diverse clientele. I don't know where they're going, who's buying them, or for what purpose. I'm not the morality police, I'm just a guy trying to make money. Enough of that, let's get to the point. I've got a story to tell and you've got time to listen. It all started a few weeks ago. Business has been booming lately with all the riots. Both sides want to be armed. My usual base of gangs, the mafia, and various criminals, not to mention all the quarantine. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that I had so much business I couldn't keep track of everything or anything, really. So, when a news report popped up a few days ago about a kid who got caught in the crossfire of some wrongdoers, and the police traced the weapons used back to the dark web, it didn't even register on my radar. That was until a few days ago. I had just hung up the phone with my grandma, who wasn't doing well, but I promised her the payment for her treatment was on its way, when I got an email from a client, a small gang called Sun Hyun. If that doesn't ring a bell, look it up on Google. They were asking why they received 112 30-centimeter black dildos instead of the AK-47 rifles they ordered. Let me tell you, they didn't find it funny. After that, the emails started pouring in, and the threats to my life came in from major gangs to small-time local criminals wondering where their Bambi Killer 3000 was. I spent all Monday contacting my contacts and asking what had happened. None of them knew anything. According to them, the shipments had gone out as ordered. I had to hire a hacker to get into the UPS system, only to find out that the orders had been rerouted to law enforcement agencies, and then other orders had been sent instead. Holy hell, my life's ruined, I said to myself, head in hands, trying to piece together what had really happened. The reality hadn't started sinking in when a voice came from my computer speakers. Having a bad day? Seems like a whole week. Funny how these things come out of nowhere and take you by surprise. I looked up and noticed the light was on, indicating my webcam was active. When you've been on the dark web as long as I have, you know the risks of getting hacked. I thought I had set up enough protection, but there's always someone who can get around it, I guess. Unfazed by this, given my recent mood, I stood there and flipped the camera off. I wouldn't have taken you for the stoic type, especially after your reputation is ruined and your life may be in danger. You've pissed off some major buyers, haven't you? Maybe they're coming to take what they didn't get. Wait, it was you, wasn't it? I said, standing up abruptly. Initially, this was a nuisance, but now this voice had my full attention. What I may or may not have done should be the least of your worries. You should be more concerned about the 4 triad members coming around the corner of the street right now, said the voice. My computer screen changed to a CCTV camera on my street. I think it was from an ATM, and showed a group of burly Chinese men walking down the street. I could tell it was near my place by the little bakery across the road from the camera. At first, I rushed to grab my things and leave, but then I realized, why would this voice ruin my life and then help me escape by warning me that someone was coming after me? Inches from the door, I paused as I mulled this over. Moments later, there was a knock on my apartment door. Through the peephole, I saw the same 4 men who had been on the street minutes earlier. Vibrations sounded from my pocket, and I reached in to pull out my phone. Don't talk, just listen. I know a safe place you can go. Head out the back window and down the fire escape. I'll tell you where to go after that. The same voice from my computer speakers said to me through my phone. I didn't have a second to think about what was happening and followed what I was told to do. I climbed down the rusty fire escape into the dirty alley below. I had just reached the ground when one of the lookouts on the street saw me. He shouted to his companions and the chase began. Take the next left, then cross the street and go down the alley on the other side, I was told. Gunshots rang out behind me and a bullet whizzed past my head. Hurry up, you're almost there. I can't hold the traffic light much longer, the voice told me. There was no traffic on the street, so I was able to cross easily. The men were about 3 meters behind me, and as soon as I was on the other side, the traffic light turned green, and the street I had just crossed filled with traffic. One of the men seemed to think he could follow me and that the cars would stop for him. He was wrong and got hit by one. This caused a massive traffic jam, and the other men had to abandon the chase to tend to their now unconscious comrade. Go down the alley, then take a left and enter the building there. I did as instructed, and once I turned the corner, I rushed to the door on my left and closed it behind me with relief. The room was large and dark, except for the flicker of a computer screen in the middle. There wasn't much I could make out, but the space seemed empty. By the white light, I could see the wall to my right was covered in foam latex padding. My phone hung up, and the soft click of a lock came from the door behind me. Hey, you can't lock me in here, I shouted. What the hell do you think you're doing? I asked as I moved toward the computer. How the hell did the triad get my address, and who the hell are you? Why would you save me after ruining my life? I'm the guy who gave the triad your address, that's who I am, the voice from the computer said. I saved you after ruining your life because revenge is a dish best served cold. The temperature in the room began to drop instantly, and within minutes my breath was visible as I curled up on the floor in a feeble attempt to stay warm. That's when I realized I was in some kind of warehouse, and the foam latex was insulation. My breathing became labored and my eyes wouldn't focus. I tried to speak, but all that came out was gibberish. My heavy eyelids refused to open as I slipped into a darkness I had never experienced before. Get up, I'm not done with you yet, the voice said. My head throbbed like a bass drum, dull and aching. The lights were on now in the warehouse. The place was even bigger than I had originally thought. It wasn't just a freezer as I had imagined. It spanned about half a city block and was covered in white from wall to wall. There was a door opposite the one I entered, and one on each of the other walls as well. A sharp pain radiated through my right hand. Looking down, I was shocked to realize that my middle finger had been cut off at the root. What the hell, my finger? You took my finger. It hurts when something is suddenly taken from you, doesn't it? Here are my rules, listen closely. Don't touch the computer or you'll die. Do as I say or you'll die. Don't try to escape or you'll die. That's all, pretty simple. For the next 24 hours, you belong to me. Now come here. I want to show you something. Still too weak to stand, I crawled to the screen like an animal. The pain blinded me every time my hand touched the ground, though at least the bleeding had stopped. Pictures of guns appeared on the screen. 3 pistols and an automatic rifle. "Look familiar?" the man asked. "No, should they? You sold them earlier this year. They were used in a shooting that killed 2 drug dealers and an innocent kid." "Look, I just facilitate sales. I don't handle the product directly. I'm more of a middleman. What these people want to use them for isn't my business. I'm just trying to make a little money." "Then get a job and contribute to society like a normal person, you human trash. Jobs these days barely cover the bills, let alone pay for cancer treatment for a grandma. Go cry to a psychologist. The point is, these guns are now in the police station evidence locker. I want you to get them back." "I can't do that. I'm a mid-level arms dealer. I can't outsmart security or impersonate an officer to get in there. I need a uniform, a badge, access cards. It's impossible for me." "I think now would be a good time to take a close look at your mutilated finger." I brought my hand up to eye level and looked deeply at the wound. Underneath all the clots and pulp, I could clearly make out a silvery metal. "That container holds potassium cyanide. If you don't do what I say, it will inject a lethal dose into you. I've got the button right here in my hand." Images of me began flashing on the screen. They were of me at the grocery store, at the gas station, even walking near my apartment. "I can see you anywhere in the city. Deviate from the course and you're dead. There's an earpiece in a basket by the door. Plug it into your phone via Bluetooth and listen to my instructions. Do what I say, and you'll be fine." I went to the door and found everything as he said. I plugged the earpiece into my phone and put it in my ear. It was pretty small and would probably go unnoticed by others. There was also a police uniform in the basket, which I put on. He then told me which station to go to and that a car was waiting for me outside. The door unlocked with a click. Outside, there was a fully marked police car, gassed up and ready to go. Whoever this guy was, he had connections I'd never seen before. It was a 30-minute drive filled with nerves to my destination. My hand hurt like hell the whole time, a constant reminder of the power this person now had over me. "So you need these guns back so you don't get in trouble. If that's the case, why didn't you just send one of your guys to do it? There was no need to torture me and harass me like this. I'm just saying, you seem to have connections and incredible hacking skills. No need for all this." "Turn left here," he responded, and I drove the rest of the way in silence, except when he gave directions. I finally arrived at the station. I was a little worried my hand would draw attention, so I shoved it into my pocket. The added pressure from the pants made the capsule shift. I worried it might accidentally trigger and I'd drop dead in the middle of a police station surrounded by officers. Wouldn't that be a crazy story for the 6 o'clock news? "The evidence locker is in the basement. Your phone signal will cut out down there. You have 15 minutes to get the guns and get out, or I'll inject the cyanide. I don't want you turning yourself in or anything. Everything you need to get the guns is in your back left pocket, and I've already sent the necessary paperwork to the computer," the man said, and then went silent. I got to the basement without any problems, showed my badge, and was let in. Everything was going smoothly. I went to the back and put the 3 guns in evidence bags, then started to leave. "Hey, you have to sign those out. You can't just take them like that," said the guy behind the counter. "Oh yeah, long day, I must have forgotten," I replied. I gave the man my badge number and signed some documents. "I thought this case was closed. Why do they want to review the evidence again?" the clerk asked. I stumbled a bit, then made something up. "New evidence in the case. The prosecutor wants to review some things, might be reopening it," I said, hoping that some of that made sense. "Ah, okay. You must be from downtown. All the documents are in order, but I'll need a detective to sign off on it first." The clerk stood up and went to the back. I could see him through a window talking to a man in a suit. He looked at me, then the other man looked at me, and the clerk gestured toward me. I didn't know what they were saying, but the detective seemed suspicious. 14 minutes had already passed, and I didn't have time to wait. Without thinking, I grabbed the bags with the guns through the plexiglass divider and ran. I could hear the office doors slam open as the clerk and the detective followed me. It didn't matter if they caught me. If I didn't get out of there in a minute, I'd die anyway. I ran up the stairs and sprinted as fast as I could. My heart was pounding as I burst through the first-floor doors. My pursuers were right behind me, shouting for someone to stop me. A burly cop stood in front of me right before the main doors. I lowered my shoulder as if I was going to ram him, but then sidestepped left, then right. He lunged at me, but I barely avoided him and ran out into the parking lot. Gunshots rang out as I sprinted toward my patrol car and jumped in. The back window shattered as it was hit by a bullet, but I managed to turn the key and speed out of there. The deafening sounds of sirens filled the air as a line of squad cars chased me. "Do you have the guns?" the voice in my earpiece said. "Yes, you bastard, you set me up. I didn't know you'd screw things up. I'll take care of it. Just make sure you get out of their sight." I managed to take a few sharp turns and lose them for a second. Then I heard my mystery man's voice over the police radio, giving them false directions about where I was headed, leading them away from me. He then told me where to ditch the car I was in, and that a new vehicle would be waiting there for me along with a change of clothes. Again, I did as he said, and got into an old Ford Pinto and changed my clothes. It took me about 20 minutes to get back to the warehouse. The lights were off again, and the computer was the only thing visible. "Put the guns in the back and then come back to the computer," I was told. I went and did it. When I approached, I noticed on the screen a picture of a small child. "I'm not kidnapping any kid or taking care of one. You can kill me right now if that's what you want," I said. "No, you won't. You've already done it. Kneel down and take a good look at this picture. Surely you recognize him. He was all over the news not too long ago." "I don't know what you mean. I've never killed a kid in my life," I said as I knelt to look. "Not directly, but let me tell you about him. He was 9 years old and had just gotten his new shiny bike, the one he always wanted. He asked his dad if he could go out for a ride, and his dad said yes. What kind of world is it when a kid can't even ride his own bike? He was just a few blocks from home when gunshots filled the street. There were some dealers on that block, and it was a drive-by shooting. Do you know where those men got their guns from?" "Let me guess, me," I responded. "Do you know what guns they were?" A voice said behind me, and the touch of cold steel pressed against the back of my head. "You killed my son when you sold those men these guns, the same ones I had you retrieve for me." Whoever this man was, he was now right behind me, and from the sound of his voice, he was eagerly anticipating my death. "All right, man, if you're going to do it, just do it already. But no, I'm only doing this to help my grandma. She'd already be dead if it wasn't for me. She's old and has already lived her life. My son had his whole life ahead of him, and you stole that from him. The ends don't justify the means." A dull thud echoed in my head as he struck me with the butt of the gun. I was on the ground looking up, tears welling up from the pain. He pointed the gun at my face and pulled the trigger. I flinched in anticipation of my final moments. Click. The gun was empty. "Death is too good for you and will never bring my son back. You're going to live your life in fear from now on. One day, or maybe never, you'll experience the most horrible and painful death you could ever imagine. Inside you is another capsule different from the last, one that won't be detected by any medical procedure or scan. If I ever feel the need to activate it, you'll die slowly, painfully, and unstoppably. You'll just have to wait and see if that day comes." He then threw the gun against my face, breaking my nose. I heard his footsteps fade as he walked out the door. The temperature began to drop again, and the faint sounds of police sirens echoed in the distance as I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was in the hospital being treated for hypothermia. The police linked me to the theft from the evidence locker, and now I'm serving 20 years in state prison. My hand throbs with pain every time the weather changes, and I hardly sleep anymore. I'm always wondering if today will be the last day of my life. If you have kids, you know you'd do anything for them, almost anything, and I'm no different. When my 2 teenagers asked for a specific breed of dog, I agreed to get it for them. We live on a ranch, so it makes sense to have a dog around. I was never excited about having pets beyond all the farm animals we have, but now that my daughters wanted a dog, I was determined to get one for them. The only problem is that it's not easy to get a Mexican hairless dog. These dogs are extremely rare and expensive. Forget about the money, I was willing to pay a large sum for a purebred, healthy dog, but no store in our town had one available. I asked my daughters if a golden retriever or even a German shepherd would be okay, but their hearts were set on that particular breed. Mexican hairless dogs are not only intelligent but also very beautiful to look at. I searched to see if any other pet stores in neighboring towns could get one for me, but none could, no matter how much money I offered. Then, I started looking at pet stores across the state, but none could provide me with one in the short time I was looking for. The waiting list was at least 6 months to a year. I even tried some pet adoption shelters, but they didn't have a Mexican hairless dog either. As a last desperate attempt, I joined some forums and social media groups of people who owned exotic dogs, but those who had a Mexican hairless dog weren't willing to part with theirs, not even for 2 teenage girls. I was so frustrated seeing the defeated faces of my daughters that I resorted to less conventional methods to get a dog. Yes, you guessed it, I started browsing the dark web to find a Mexican hairless puppy. I did my research and knew that the chances of finding a purebred, healthy puppy on the dark web were slim, but I still wanted to try for my daughters. Finally, after days of browsing the deep web, I found a puppy mill that could provide me with a Mexican hairless dog. I was thrilled, and they even assured me it was a purebred puppy. The cost of the puppy wasn't too high, so I agreed to buy it. I sent the payment in advance through an international payment gateway. They assured me they'd deliver the puppy to our doorstep within the next week or so. I didn't tell my family about the dog's arrival since a small part of me knew this could very well be a scam. But, as expected, a man showed up at my door, carrying a Mexican hairless puppy. He handed me the puppy and I made the remaining payment after ensuring that at least physically, the dog seemed healthy. Then, I discreetly grabbed a cardboard box and put the puppy inside. It was softly barking and seemed very happy to see me, wagging its tail nonstop. I placed the box on our doorstep and pretended not to know it had been left there. When my older daughter, who was 14 at the time, saw the box and found the puppy inside, she screamed, and the next thing I knew, everyone was petting the little thing. My wife and daughters were so happy that seeing them like that moved me to tears and made me feel good. That night, the little puppy slept in my daughter's room, and the next morning I got a large pen for the puppy to sleep in since it wasn't house-trained and had already soiled the carpet 3 times. We didn't have dog trainers on hand, so my older daughter took charge of training the puppy. Days went by and strange things started happening on the ranch. Some chickens disappeared and my cows got sick. The horses acted strangely whenever they saw the puppy, and all the animals were always nervous around the new dog. At first I thought it was just because the dog was new, and that the animals would take time to accept it. But 2 months went by and nothing changed. By then, the puppy had grown a bit and understood basic commands. It was a fairly smart dog, and I was happy to have gotten a legitimate purebred dog from the dark web. One afternoon, while my wife and I were having tea on the porch, my daughter came running out of her room crying. Naturally, we were concerned and asked her what had happened, and she told us that the puppy had bitten her. I should note that the dog had never done anything like this before, but we knew she also played rougher with the dog, so it might have been an accident, and we let it go. We took her to the doctor, and that was that. However, the chickens kept disappearing. Finally, after losing enough of them, we decided to install a security camera in the coop. During the first week after installing the cameras, no chickens were stolen or killed. I thought the culprit had finally stopped because they knew I would catch them. But one morning, when I went to the coop, 2 chickens were missing. I went to check the security footage, but I didn't find anything, and worst of all, no one had tampered with the recordings. The next day, one of my horses died. It had been fine the night before, and the next morning we found it dead in the stable. There was a strange bite mark near its left foreleg that didn't match any animal I knew. That's when, for the first time, I made the connection that all these incidents started happening as soon as the new puppy arrived, and the stable animals had never accepted it. It slept in the living room or in my daughter's room. I started watching the dog and noticed some strange things about it. It was always overly friendly with our family, but when it was alone in the yard or the house, its behavior was different. I even caught it walking on 2 legs, but that could have been a trick my daughters taught it. It barely had any interest in sticks, dog toys, or even its bed when it was alone. It always lingered around the chicken coop and the other animals, like a predator would. It even barked and growled at the animals, and they had an almost irrational fear of it. So I installed a security camera in the stable as well, and I didn't tell anyone. The next day, when I checked the footage, I saw the most horrifying image of my life. The dog, which had been sleeping in my daughter's room, had gone into the stable in the middle of the night when most of the animals were asleep. It opened its mouth abnormally wide, and its tongue came out. On its tongue, I saw another set of teeth appear, and it bit one of my cows on the abdomen. The cow didn't even flinch, it just bled out, and this dog licked up the spilled blood. But before leaving, it cleaned its fur by jumping into the large drinking water tank for the livestock. I was in shock as I stared at the screen of my laptop, watching the dog play outside with my kids. I quietly called the kids to come inside, and the dog followed them. I told everyone the dog was leaving today. I had no idea what to do with this creature, whatever it was, but I was going to get rid of it before its next victim was one of my family members. The cow, of course, died. My daughters cried because I was going to take their pet away, but when I showed my wife the video, she was also in shock and agreed the dog had to go. All the while, the dog sat in the corner, listening attentively to our conversation. But when I decided to pick it up and put it in my truck, it started barking, and the only two people who could get close to it were my daughters. Finally, I had no choice, so I grabbed my hunting rifle and decided to put it down right then and there. My daughters cried nonstop, but my wife held them. When I tied the dog to a tree and was about to shoot it, just as I was pulling the trigger, the dog did the unthinkable. It transformed into that horrible creature, revealing its extra set of jaws on its long tongue. This scared my daughters, but it was already too late. It had already bitten through the rope around its neck and freed itself. It lunged toward my younger daughter, but I was quick enough and shot it 3 times and it fell to the ground bleeding. Its blood was a dark red, almost black, like nothing I had ever seen before. My kids were hysterical, and my dear wife tried to comfort them. I didn't want to take any risks. That same afternoon, I cut off the animal's head and burned it. Afterward, I did some research and found out that it wasn't a dog. It was what's called a chupacabra, or maybe even a skinwalker. But I learned my lesson. I'll never buy anything on the dark web again. You never know what you're bringing into your home. After burning that thing's body, my daughters couldn't sleep for weeks. My wife and I did our best to comfort them, assuring them we were safe now. However, the truth is, I wasn't convinced myself. Even though I had eliminated the threat, the fear lingered. The idea that such a creature could enter our lives without us knowing terrified me. The fact that I had brought it into our home myself filled me with overwhelming guilt. We tried to move on, but things were never quite the same. My daughters seemed more distant, as if they no longer fully trusted me, and my wife, though she tried to act the same, had also changed. I knew that we both felt a presence, a lingering unease that never fully went away. I decided to do more research on the dark web and these creatures. I found testimonies similar to mine. People who had bought strange animals, cursed objects, or even creatures like the one that had invaded our lives. They all had one thing in common: regret. Once you've interacted with something like that, there's no going back. Some spoke of people who had disappeared after falling victim to similar scams. Others mentioned that creatures like skinwalkers or chupacabras often sought revenge. My greatest fear is that this isn't over. Even though I killed that creature, part of me fears there might be more. I've read stories of people being hunted by these entities for a long time, even after confronting them. I feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for something else to appear at any moment. For now, we've taken extra precautions. I installed more cameras around the ranch, and we've reinforced the security on our property. But every night, when I lock the door to our house and watch my daughters sleep, I can't help but think how much worse this could have ended. The only thing that comforts me is that, at least for now, we are together and safe. But if I ever see something strange or suspicious near our home again, I won't hesitate to act. This time, I won't make the same mistakes. And just in case, if you're reading this, never venture into the dark web. No matter how tempting or interesting it might seem, what you find there could destroy your life in ways you can't imagine. I learned the lesson the hard way, and I pray that others won't have to go through the same. I used to be one of those people who liked to browse the dark web for fun, and I frequented various underground-style sites. I worked in the IT industry, and for some reason the dark web and deep web are these strangely taboo things that we're not supposed to talk about with regular people. But it's not exactly the best-kept secret for those of us who tour around and look at things that are, at best, questionable. It's almost like we can sense it in other users. We all have this weird sixth sense that allows us to know if the person next to us is someone who browses the deep web. Well, not really, but we can generally tell by their attitude if they're someone who knows what they're talking about, and most of the time something about the deep web or the dark web comes up. I'm the kind of person who knows what they're talking about probably a little too well. Let me put it this way. If it was shady, suspicious, unpleasant, or fell into a legal gray area, I probably spent time each day looking at it to see what it was about. I spent more than my fair share of time on some deep web forums, mostly chatting with like-minded people who also had too much time on their hands. My favorite hobbies included posting on conspiracy forums. It's a little crazy to see what people will say when there are no limits or filters. And honestly, some of the things people say out there may be truer than we'd like to believe. For example, hitman sites totally exist and are potentially a real business. Well, not legit, and of course I mean the ones that aren't stings set up by the authorities. Anyway, aside from that, there are many marketplaces on the deep web for things that are questionable. But the dark web, well, that's where things get completely illegal. I admit to spending my fair share of time and money on dark web markets. I've bought things that are illegal to own, seen things I shouldn't have seen, and things I definitely didn't want to see. That said, I wanted to write this short story about one of the markets that really scared me and made me step away from illegal things. There was one market in particular that advertised itself as the end-all of dark web markets, and it was essentially this massive version of Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, but on the dark web. If you were looking for something you shouldn't have been and were willing to spend some Bitcoin, then you were in luck because they probably had it. Pirated movies? Check. Viagra from another country? Check. Computers potentially stolen from a government facility? You guessed it, check. However, it went a bit further. They also had services you could pay for, nothing like the hitman sites. But if you wanted to have a good time with someone who was about to die, well, you could. Hey, I don't judge people for what they do behind closed doors. I keep my opinions to myself and just live my life. That being said, I really stumbled upon something that, at first I thought, there's no way this is real. Until I messaged the seller, and then, well, I wasn't so sure anymore. It could have been a setup or a federal sting, but if it was a damn good one. I was browsing the market one afternoon looking for something stupid. I think I was looking for shoes or something, don't ask. That's when I came across something simply labeled as new. I like new things, so I eagerly clicked and went to read what was so interesting about this new product. Well, this product wasn't really a product. The description said something like, and I'm paraphrasing here, access to any age up to 7 and I can provide fake papers. Forging documents comes at an additional cost. You must have payment ready for all offers. Obviously, my first thought was that this was a sting or a scam targeting people looking for children, which would be a pretty niche scam if you think about it. So, mentally, I settled on the idea that it was a sting, and since I was a bit of a cocky 20-something, I decided to message the seller just to mess with them a bit. I logged into my account on the marketplace and went to the user to send them a message. I asked something like, "How do we know you're legit and not an agent trying to arrest someone?" They replied with, "Well, you don't," which solidified the idea of a sting that I already had in mind. I responded with, "Can you prove you're legit? I have the Bitcoin ready if you're a real seller." Again, just trying to bait them into giving me something that would confirm my personal bias. They messaged me back saying, "Boy or girl and what age?" I had to think about it for a second. I wanted to give them something a little difficult to answer, so I said, "Boy around 5. They sent me some pictures of a boy who looked about 4 or 5 years old. In the pictures, the boy seemed pretty happy. He was in a basement area playing with toys, and there was one where he was watching SpongeBob on TV. Honestly, I was starting to feel a little sick about all this, so I replied, "Is he the one for sale?" At this point, I felt like I needed to gather as much information as possible to take to the authorities. The seller replied with, "He's one of them, yes." Then I asked if they could prove they weren't just sending me a picture of their own kid, trying to lure me in. They then asked me for my name, a question I had wanted to avoid. I was a little nervous at first for obvious reasons, so I told them my name was Marcus. It's not my real name, but you don't tell people on the dark web your real name. After I told them my name, I didn't get a response for about an hour, and I was almost sure it was an agent tracking me at that moment. That was until they finally responded. I got a message back with an MP4 file attached. In the video was the boy. He was playing with a couple of Hot Wheels cars. In the video, you could hear a man talking, and I assumed it was the seller. The man asked the boy what his name was. The boy said Thomas. The man then asked, "Who's filming you?" The boy replied, "Uncle Walter." And then the man said, "And who's this video for?" The boy replied, "For Uncle Marcus." He then asked, "And why are we making this video?" The boy giggled and replied, "To find a new mom and dad." There was a bit more back and forth to show that this boy was real and to prove that the seller wasn't joking. The video ended with the seller saying, "Now that you can see little Thomas here is very real and in need of a good, loving home, let's talk payment. I prefer Bitcoin, but I'll accept any of the current stablecoins. I'll be waiting for your reply. Well, I assure you that I took that information and the video straight to the authorities, of course, in the form of an anonymous tip. I know I'm a bit of a coward, but when you're a criminal trying to bring down bigger criminals, it's best not to put your name on anything. I don't personally know what happened with the case. I assume they passed it on to the FBI division that handles that sort of thing. But I haven't been chased, arrested, or killed yet, so I guess everything's going well. And yes, unfortunately, this should serve as proof that you can literally buy anything on the dark web.